The rain fell in sheets, drowning the world in a gray roar. And I thought I'd lost everything me home. My dreams. My name. Chicago's streets didn't care who you were when you had nothing left but a soaked hoodie and a heartbeat. I was 23, shivering under a diner's awning. And the only thing keeping me alive was the stubborn refusal to let the city swallow me whole. My name is Elias Navarro. And I'd been running for 3 years, running from a small town in Indiana where my truth was a sin. From a family who'd rather see me gone than gay. From a life that felt like a noose tightening with every breath. I'd landed in Chicago with $50 and a backpack, chasing the promise of a city big enough to hide in. But cities don't care about promises. They chew you up, spit you out, and leave you counting change for a coffee just to feel human again. That night, I had $2, 37 in my pocket and nowhere to go. The diner's neon sign buzzed above me, its red glow painting my hands like blood. I was about to turn away, to let the rain take me somewhere anywhere when he appeared. A silhouette first, broad-shouldered and steady, cutting through the storm like he owned it. He stopped under the awning, shaking water from his leather jacket, and I caught his eyes green, sharp, like they could see through every wall I'd built. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stood there, close enough that I could smell the cedar and smoke on him. My heart stuttered, not from the cold, but from something else. Something I hadn't felt in years, the pull of someone who didn't look away. "You're gonna catch your death out here," he said, his voice low, rough, like gravel smoothed by a river. He tilted his head, studying me, and I felt exposed, like he could see the cracks in my armor, the nights I'd slept on benches, the days I'd gone hungry, the ache I carried for a life I'd never have. I wanted to snap back, to tell him I was fine, but my teeth chattered, betraying me. "I'm okay," I managed, my voice barely a whisper against the rain. He raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, and pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. "You don't look okay, kid." He lit one, the flame briefly illuminating his face-strong jaw, a scar slicing through his left brow, and those eyes that didn't waver. "Name's Caleb. You got one." "Elias," I said, surprised I'd given it so easily. I hadn't told anyone my real name in months. Fake IDs, fake stories, they were safer. But something about Caleb made me want to be real, if only for a second. He nodded, like my name was a contract, and offered me the cigarette. I shook my head, and he shrugged, exhaling smoke that curled into the rain. "You got a place to crash, Elias?" I didn't answer. The truth was too heavy, and I wasn't ready to admit I'd been squatting in an abandoned warehouse, sharing space with rats and ghosts. He didn't push, just leaned against the diner's brick wall, watching me like he had all the time in the world. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the city's pulse grew louder, cars honking, a distant siren, the clatter of a train overhead. "Come on," he said finally, pushing off the wall. "I know a place." I should have said no. Strangers in cities like this weren't safe, especially not ones who looked like Kayla, too confident, too sure, like they could break you without trying. But my legs moved before my brain could argue, following him into the neon-lit night. We walked in silence, my sneakers squelching against the pavement, his boots steady and sure. He led me to a narrow alley where a rusted fire escape clung to a brick building. He climbed first, not looking back, and I followed, my hands shaking on the cold metal rungs. At the top, he pushed open a window and slipped inside. I hesitated, peering into the dark room, bare walls, a single mattress, a stack of books in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was dry, warm, and smelled faintly of coffee. Caleb lit a lamp, casting soft light across his face, and I saw him clearly for the first time, maybe 30, with a quiet strength that made the room feel smaller. He gestured to the mattress. "You can crash here tonight. No strings." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at me, his eyes softening just enough to crack something in my chest. "Because I've been where you are," he said, "and someone helped me once." That night, I slept on his mattress, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like him. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of running. I dreamed of green eyes and a hand reaching out, promising I wasn't alone. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cracked window, and I woke to the sound of coffee brewing. Caleb was at a small table, reading a dog-eared book, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked up, catching me staring, and smirked. "You sleep like you're hiding from the world." I flushed, sitting up. "Maybe I am." He set the book down, his gaze steady. "Not anymore. Not here." I didn't know what he meant. Not then. But as I sipped the bitter coffee he handed me, I felt something shift, a spark of hope. Fragile but real. Caleb wasn't just a stranger offering shelter. He was something more. Something I couldn't name yet. And as we sat in that tiny room, the city waking outside, I realized I wasn't just running anymore. I was starting to chase something new. Over the next week, Caleb's apartment became my Ancora small, messy sanctuary in a city that felt like a storm. He didn't ask questions about my past, and I didn't offer answers. Instead, we built a quiet rhythm, coffee in the morning, him leaving for a job he didn't talk about, me scrounging for odd jobs to afford food. But every night, he'd come back, his leather jacket slung over his shoulder, and we'd talk about music, the city, anything but the scars we both carried. I learned Caleb was a mechanic, fixing cars in a garage on the south side. He'd grown up in foster homes, bouncing around until he landed in Chicago at 18. He didn't say much about his past, but the way his eyes darkened when he mentioned it told me enough. He was like someone the world had tried to break but hadn't. And yet, there was a warmth to him, a steadiness that made me want to trust him, even when trust felt like a trap. One night, he took me to a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor, tucked in a corner of Wicker Park. The place was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and a jukebox playing old rock. Caleb knew everyone, a bartender, a gruff woman named Mara, slid him a beer without asking. A group of mechanics in the corner waved him over. But he stayed by my side, his shoulder brushing mine as we leaned against the bar. I felt eyes on us, curious, judging, but Caleb didn't flinch. He never did. "You ever been in love?" he asked out of nowhere, his voice cutting through the bar's noise. The question hit me like a punch, and I nearly choked on my soda. "No," I said too quickly, my heart racing. "You?" He took a long sip of his beer, his eyes distant. "Once. Didn't end well." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. But the air between us shifted, charged with something unspoken. I wanted to ask more, to know who'd hurt him, who'd been lucky enough to be loved by someone like him. Instead, I stared at the bubbles in my glass, my mind spinning with questions I was too scared to voice. That night, back in his apartment, I couldn't sleep. The mattress was too small, the room too quiet, and Caleb's presence across the room felt like a magnet. I watched him in the dark, his chest rising and falling, and wondered what it would be like to be close to him, not just physically, but in the way that mattered. The thought terrified me. I'd spent so long hiding who I was, burying my desires under layers of fear, that wanting someone felt like stepping off a cliff. The next day, Caleb took me to his garage. It was a cavernous space, filled with the clang of tools and the smell of oil. He tossed me a wrench and pointed to an old Chevy. "You ever worked on a car?" I shook my head, feeling out of place among the grease-stained mechanics. Never had a reason to. He grinned, a rare flash of teeth that made my stomach flip. Time to learn. For hours, he showed me how to change oil, tighten bolts, listen to an engine's hum for clues. His hands moved with a confidence I envied, and when he guided my fingers to a stubborn bolt, his touch lingered just long enough to make my breath catch. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just being kind. But the way his eyes met mine said otherwise. That evening, as we walked back to his place, the city felt different, less like a predator, more like a possibility. Caleb bumped his shoulder against mine, a playful gesture that made me laugh despite myself. "You're not half bad with a wrench," he said. "I had a good teacher," I shot back, surprising myself with the ease of it. He stopped walking, turning to face me under a streetlight. The glow caught the scar on his brow, and for a moment, he looked vulnerable, like he was weighing something heavy. "Elias," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You don't have to keep running." My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him, to believe I could stop, that I could be more than a shadow in someone else's story. But fear was a habit, and I wasn't sure I knew how to break it. "I don't know how to stay," I admitted, my voice barely audible. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, and I felt the world narrow to the space between us. "I'll show you," he said, and for the first time, I believed him. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb's apartment started to feel like home. I got a job at the garage, thanks to him, and for the first time, I had money in my pocket that wasn't borrowed or stolen. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy groceries, to split the rent, to feel like I was building something instead of breaking apart. Caleb and I fell into a rhythm, working side by side, sharing meals, stealing glances when we thought the other wasn't looking. But the closer we got, the more I felt the weight of my past creeping back. One night, I woke up sweating, my heart pounding from a dream of my father's voice, his fists, the way he'd looked at me when I told him who I was. I sat up, gasping, and Caleb was there in an instant, his hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I nodded, but I wasn't. The nightmares were getting worse, reminders of why I'd run, why I didn't deserve the warmth of this life. Caleb didn't push, just sat with me in the dark, his presence steadying me like an anchor in a storm. I wanted to tell him everything about the small-town church that branded me a sinner, about the bruises I'd hidden, about the boy I'd loved in secret who'd turned his back when it mattered most. But the words stayed locked in my throat. The next day, Caleb took me to a community center in Boys Town, a place he said had helped him when he was younger. It was a bright, noisy space filled with people, queer kids laughing, older folks sharing stories, volunteers passing out flyers for support groups. I felt out of place, like an imposter who didn't belong in their joy. But Caleb moved through the room with ease, greeting people by name, his hand brushing mine as if to say, "You're safe here." We sat in on a support group, and I listened as strangers shared their stories, some heartbreaking, some hopeful. A trans woman named Lena talked about finding her chosen family after years of rejection. A non-binary teen named Riley spoke about their first pride parade, how it felt like flying. I stayed quiet, my hands clenched in my lap, but their words chipped away at the walls I'd built. Afterward, Caleb and I walked along Halsted Street, the heart of Chicago's queer district. Rainbow flags fluttered above us, and the air buzzed with life couples holding hands, drag queens joking outside bars, music spilling from open doors. I'd never seen anything like it, a place where people like me weren't just tolerated but celebrated. It felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. "You ever been to Pride?" Caleb asked, his voice casual but his eyes searching. I shook my head, didn't think it was for me. He stopped, turning to face me. "It's for anyone who's ever had a fight to be themselves." "That's you, Elias." His words hit hard, stirring something I'd buried deep. I wanted to believe him, to believe I could belong somewhere. But doubt clung to me like damp clothes. "What if I don't know how to be myself?" I asked, my voice cracking. He stepped closer, his hand finding mine, and this time he didn't let go. "You're figuring it out, and I'm here." That night, back in his apartment, I told him about Indiana. The words spilled out like a flood, my father's rage, my mother's silence, the way my hometown had turned its back when I came out. Caleb listened, his face unreadable, but his hand stayed on mine, grounding me. When I finished, he didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug. It was the first time I'd let someone hold me in years, and I felt the weight of my past lift. Just a little. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered, and I believed him not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. The garage became my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of work. Caleb taught me more than just engine. She taught me how to trust my hands, my instincts, myself. We'd work late, the radio playing classic rock, our laughter echoing in the empty shop. But even as I settled into this new life, the past wasn't done with me. One afternoon, a man came into the garage, a tall, wiry guy with a face like a storm cloud. He asked for Caleb, his voice sharp, and I caught the way Caleb's shoulders tensed when he saw him. "What do you want, Derek?" Caleb asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Derek's eyes flicked to me, cold and assessing, before settling on Caleb. "We need to talk. Outside." I stayed back, pretending to focus on a carburetor, but my ears strained to catch their voices. They stepped outside, and I heard snippets, something about money, a debt, a name I didn't recognize. Caleb's voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning. When he came back inside, his jaw was tight, his eyes distant. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He nodded, but it was a lie. I could see it in the way he moved, like a man carrying a weight he wouldn't share. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I handed him a wrench and went back to work, the silence between us heavier than usual. That night, Caleb was quieter than usual, lost in his thoughts. I caught him staring out the window, his cigarette burning down to ash. "You can tell me. You know," I said, my voice soft. "Whatever it is." He looked at me, his eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought he'd open up. But he just shook his head. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But I was worried. The way Derek had looked at him, the way Caleb's guard had gone It felt like trouble, the kind that could pull this fragile life apart. I didn't press, but I started paying attention, noticing the late-night phone calls Caleb took in the hallway, the way he'd checked the locks twice before bed. A few days later, we went to a street festival in Andersonville. The air was thick with the smell of food trucks and the sound of live music. Caleb seemed lighter, his arm brushing mine as we walked through the crowd. We stopped at a booth selling handmade jewelry, and he picked up a leather bracelet, holding it up to my wrist. "Suits you," he said, his voice warm. I laughed, flustered. "I don't wear jewelry." "You should," he said, and before I could protest, he bought it, slipping it onto my wrist. His fingers lingered, and I felt my pulse quicken. For a moment, the world was just us, no past, no fears, just the heat of his touch and the promise in his eyes. But then I saw him, Derek, standing across the street, watching us. My stomach dropped, and Caleb followed my gaze. His face hardened, and he stepped in front of me, like a shield. "Stay here," he said, his voice low, and he crossed the street to confront Derek. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the tension in Caleb's shoulders, the way Derek's hands gestured wildly. When Caleb came back, his expression was unreadable. "Let's go," he said, and we left the festival without another word. Back at the apartment, I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is he? Caleb. What's going on?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Derek's an old friend, from a life I left behind. He thinks I owe him something." "What kind of something?" I pressed. Caleb looked at me, his eyes heavy with secrets, the kind that doesn't let go easy. The tension with Derek hung over us like a storm cloud. Caleb tried to act normal, cracking jokes at the garage, cooking dinner like nothing was wrong. But I saw the cracks, his hands shaking when he lit a cigarette, the way he'd glance at the door like he expected trouble. I wanted to help, to be the one who held him together for once. But I didn't know how. One night, I came back from a late shift to find the apartment empty. Caleb's jacket was gone, his keys missing from the table. Panic clawed at my chest. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I paced the room, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Derek. An accident. Something worse. Hours passed, and just when I was about to go looking for him, the door opened. Caleb stumbled in, his face bruised, his knuckles bloody. I froze, my heart in my throat. What happened? I demanded, rushing to him. He waved me off, collapsing onto the mattress. It's fine. Just a misunderstanding. Bullshit, I snapped, grabbing a damp cloth to clean his face. You're hurt. Tell me what happened. He sighed, wincing as I dabbed at a cut on his cheek. Derek's mixed up with some bad people. I used to run with them. Years ago. I got out. But he didn't. Now he's trying to drag me back in. My stomach twisted. Back into what? Doesn't matter, he said, his voice hard. I'm done with that life. But it wasn't done with him. Over the next few days, I noticed strangers lingering outside the garage, watching us. Caleb's phone buzzed constantly, and he'd step outside to take the calls, his voice low and angry. I felt helpless, caught in a story I didn't understand. But I wasn't going to let him face it alone. One evening, I followed him. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't shake the fear that he was slipping away, that the life we'd built was about to crumble. He went to a warehouse on the edge of the city, a place that reeked of oil and decay. I hid in the shadows, watching as he met Derek and two other men, big guys with cold eyes. Their voices were muffled, but I caught enough: money, a job, a threat. Caleb stood his ground, his voice steady. I'm out. Derek. You know that. One of the men stepped closer, his hand on something under his jacket. My heart stopped, but Caleb didn't flinch. You don't get to walk away, the man said. Not until we're done. I wanted to run out, to scream, to do something, but fear kept me rooted. Caleb said something I couldn't hear, and the men backed off. But the air was thick with tension. When Caleb finally left, I slipped away before he could see me, my heart pounding. Back at the apartment, I confronted him. I followed you, I admitted, my voice shaking. What the hell is going on? Caleb. His face darkened, but not with anger, with guilt. You shouldn't have done that. I'm not losing you, I said, my voice breaking. Not to them. Not to anything. He looked at me, his eyes raw, and for the first time, I saw fear in him. I'm trying to keep you safe, he said. This isn't your fight. It is now, I said, stepping closer. I'm not running anymore, and I'm not letting you run either. For a moment, we just stood there, the space between us electric. Then he kissed me hard, desperate, like he was afraid I'd disappear. I kissed him back, pouring everything I'd held back into it: me fear, my hope, my love. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath ragged. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You're wrong, I said, my voice fierce. You're everything. The kiss changed everything. It wasn't just a moment, it was a promise, a line we'd crossed together. But even as Caleb and I grew closer, the shadow of Derek and his world loomed larger. We didn't talk about it, but we both knew it wasn't over. I saw it in the way Caleb checked the locks, the way he'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling like he was waiting for the world to crash down. I started going to the community center alone, finding solace in the support groups. Lena, the trans woman I'd met, became a friend, her sharp wit and warm smile pulling me out of my head. She told me about her own battles: family rejection, street life, finding her way to a chosen family that loved her fiercely. You and Caleb, she said one day, her eyes knowing. You're building something real. Don't let fear take it from you. Her words stuck with me, but fear was hard to shake. One night, I came home to find the apartment trashed, books scattered. The mattress flipped. A window cracked. Caleb was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, a bottle of whiskey beside him. My heart sank. What happened? I asked, dropping to my knees beside him. They're sending a message, he said, his voice hollow. They want me back. I grabbed his face, forcing him to look at me. You're not going back. We'll figure this out. Together. He shook his head, his eyes wet. You don't get it, Elias. These people, they don't let go. If I don't do what they want, they'll come for you. The words hit like a slap, but I didn't back down. Then we fight. I'm not losing you. He looked at me, his expression torn between love and fear, and pulled me into his arms. We stayed like that for hours, holding each other in the wreckage of our home, promising to face whatever came next together. The next day, I went to Mara, the bartender at the Rusty Anchor. She knew Caleb's past, had known him when he was mixed up with Derek's crew. Over a beer, she told me the truth. Caleb had been a runner for a small-time gang, moving money and goods until he'd had enough and walked away. Derek hadn't let go, and now he was using Caleb's past to pull him back in. What can we do? I asked, my voice shaking. Mara leaned forward, her eyes fierce. You get out. Both of you. Leave Chicago. Start over somewhere new. I wanted to argue, to say we could fight, but the fear in Caleb's eyes haunted me. That night, I told him what Mara had said. He was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing the bracelet on my wrist. You'd leave with me? He asked finally, his voice barely audible. Anywhere, I said, meaning it. We started planning quietly, carefully. We'd save enough money, find a new city, a new life. But even as we planned, the threats grew closer. A car followed us home one night, its headlights burning in the rearview mirror. A note was slipped under our door, and signed but clear, you can't run forever. We knew we had to act fast. Caleb reached out to an old contact, a woman named Tasha who'd left the life years ago. She lived in Seattle, ran a small auto shop, and owed Caleb a favor. She offered us a place to stay, a job, a fresh start. It wasn't much, but it was hope. The night before we planned to leave, Caleb took me to the lakefront. The city sparkled behind us, its lights reflecting on the water. He held my hand, his grip tight. I never thought I'd have this, he said, his voice thick. Someone like you. I leaned into him, my heart full. You saved me, Caleb. Now let me save you. The plan was simple, pack light. Take a bus to Seattle. Disappear into a new life. But nothing in our story had ever been simple. The morning we were set to leave, Derek showed up at the garage, his face a mask of rage. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, their hands in their pockets, their eyes cold. I was in the back, working on a tire, when I heard Caleb's voice, sharp and low. Not here, Derek. I stepped out, my heart pounding, and saw them face to face. Caleb's body tense like a coiled spring. Get out, Caleb said, his voice a warning. This ends now. Derek smirked, stepping closer. You think you can just walk away? You owe us, Caleb. And your little boyfriend here pays collateral. I froze, fear and anger warring in my chest. Caleb moved in front of me, his voice deadly calm. You touch him, and you're done. The air crackled with tension, and for a moment, I thought it would end in blood. But then Mara appeared, a baseball bat in her hands, her eyes blazing. Get the hell out of my friend's shop, she said, her voice steady. Behind her, 2 mechanics from the garage stepped up, tools in hand. Derek's men hesitated, and I saw the first crack in his confidence. He raised his hands, backing off. This isn't over, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He and his men left, the door slamming behind them. We didn't wait for them to come back. That night, we boarded a bus to Seattle. Our bags light, our hearts heavy. Caleb held my hand the whole way, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. We'd face the dark together and come out stronger. Seattle was different, cooler, greener, quieter. Tasha welcomed us with open arms. Her auto shop a small haven where we could start over. Caleb and I worked side by side, rebuilding engines and our lives. We found a tiny apartment near the water, its walls bare but full of promise. We hung rainbow flags in the window, a quiet declaration of who we were. One evening, months later, we stood on a pier, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Caleb wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. I thought my life was over, I said, my voice soft, until you walked into the dark and took my hand. He turned me to face him, his eyes shining. And I promised to stay, he said, his voice steady. I meant it. We kissed, the world fading away. And I knew this was the life I'd fought for, the love I dreamed of. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living, together, in a world we'd made our own. The road hadn't been easy, and maybe it never would be. But with Caleb by my side, I wasn't afraid. We'd face the worst and come out stronger. Our hands clasped, our hearts open. And as the waves crashed below us, I knew we'd keep fighting, keep loving, keep building a life that was ours, flawed, beautiful, and true.